For most of recorded history, everything known about the Philistines came from their enemies. The Hebrew Bible describes them as a persistent, militarily sophisticated threat occupying the coastal cities of Canaan, including Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. Israel struggled to distinguish itself from the Philistines culturally, territorially, and religiously across several centuries of conflict. Goliath was a Philistine. Samson's antagonists were Philistines. The Ark of the Covenant was captured by Philistines and held in their territory for 7 months before it was returned. The word Philistine entered multiple modern languages as a synonym for cultural coarseness, a legacy of how their biblical portrayal shaped the way later civilizations thought about them. What the Philistines thought about themselves, what they called themselves, and where they believed they came from, did not survive. None of their literature has been recovered. There are no Philistine religious texts, no administrative records written in their own voice, and no account of their history from their own perspective. They left behind pottery, architecture, food remains, and graves. The interpretation of all of it was done by researchers working from the outside, without the corrective that a culture's own written record provides. When ancient DNA was finally extracted from a Philistine cemetery, and the results were published in 2019, the question of where the Philistines came from, a question argued over for more than a century, received an answer. The textual and archaeological record had been pointing toward that answer, without being able to confirm it. The site that made the analysis possible is called Ashkelon. It sits on the Mediterranean coast of what is now southern Israel, and has been continuously occupied for around 5,000 years, making it one of the longest inhabited cities in the world. In the Bronze Age, it was one of the 5 principal Philistine cities. The Leon Levy expedition, a Harvard-led archaeological project, has been excavating at Ashkelon since 1985. In the course of that work, they uncovered a cemetery dating to the early Iron Age, the period immediately following the Philistines' arrival in Canaan, containing the remains of individuals buried with the material culture associated specifically with the Philistine population. Extracting usable ancient DNA from remains in the southern Levant is technically difficult. The climate is hot, the soil chemistry is harsh, and DNA degrades rapidly under those conditions. The petrous bone, the dense inner ear bone that protects genetic material better than any other skeletal element, was the source the team targeted. From 10 individuals buried in the early Philistine cemetery, they successfully extracted and sequenced enough genetic material to conduct a meaningful population analysis. The results were published in Science Advances in July 2019. The question the DNA was being asked to answer had been debated since the 19th century. The Philistines appear in the Egyptian record, as well as the biblical one. Ramesses III, in inscriptions from around 1175 BCE, describing his military campaigns, refers to groups of seaborne invaders attacking Egypt and the Levantine coast, groups the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples. Most scholars identify the Philistines as one of these Sea Peoples. The central question was where the Sea Peoples came from. The leading hypothesis, supported by the material culture the Philistines brought with them, their pottery styles, their architectural preferences, and their food practices, pointed to the Aegean, specifically the region encompassing Mycenaean Greece, Crete, Cyprus, and the surrounding islands. The pottery that appears in the earliest Philistine occupation layers at Ashkelon and other sites is technically and stylistically consistent with Aegean ceramic traditions of the late Bronze Age. The architecture shows similarities to Aegean building practices. The faunal remains from early Philistine contexts show a higher proportion of pig and dog bones than contemporary Canaanite sites, consistent with Aegean dietary practices and inconsistent with Canaanite ones. Material culture argued for an Aegean origin, but material culture can be adopted. Trade, contact, and cultural exchange can produce populations that use foreign pottery and build in foreign styles without being descended from the population that originated those practices. DNA could settle what the pottery could not. What the sequencing showed was that the individuals buried in the early Philistine cemetery at Ashkelon carried ancestry that was not present in the region before their arrival. Specifically, they carried European-related ancestry, genetic components associated with populations from southern Europe, consistent with an Aegean or broader Mediterranean origin, that was absent in the Bronze Age Canaanite populations that preceded them in the same geographic area. The signal was clearest in the earliest burials. The individuals from the first generations of Philistine occupation at Ashkelon showed the highest proportion of this European-related ancestry. In the burials from later generations, individuals who died after the Philistine community had been established in Canaan for longer, the proportion of that ancestry decreased, and the proportion of local Levantine ancestry increased. The pattern is exactly what you would expect from a founding population that arrived from elsewhere, settled, and then interbred with the surrounding Canaanite population over subsequent generations. The DNA confirmed the migration. It also showed how quickly it was absorbed. Within a few generations, the genetic signal of the founding population was diluting into the local gene pool. The Philistines who fought the Israelites in the accounts written centuries after the initial arrival were, genetically, a mixture of their Aegean founders and the Canaanite population they had settled among. The cultural distinctiveness they maintained, including pottery, language, and religious practices, persisted long after the genetic distinctiveness had substantially faded. The biblical framing of the Philistines as perpetual outsiders, as a people fundamentally alien to the Levantine world they occupied, does not survive the genetic evidence in the form it was presented. Within a few generations of arrival, the Philistines were genetically Levantine in significant proportion. The boundary the biblical text draws between Israelite and Philistine, between native and foreign, between chosen and unchosen, was maintained in the cultural and religious record long after the biological reality it implied had ceased to hold. This is not a finding unique to the Philistines. Ancient DNA research across multiple regions and periods has repeatedly shown that cultural boundaries between ancient populations were not genetic boundaries. Groups that ancient texts describe as fundamentally separate were frequently, at the level of the genome, substantially intermixed. The categories that mattered to the people who wrote the texts, ethnicity, religion, and political identity, did not map onto the categories that DNA records show. What makes the Philistine case particularly striking is the precision with which it can be demonstrated. The founding event is visible in the early burials. The assimilation is visible in the later ones. The entire arc of a migration, settlement, and demographic integration is preserved in a cemetery on the Israeli coast, readable now in a way it was not readable before the technology existed to extract and sequence ancient DNA from petrous bone in a hot climate. The Philistines disappear from the historical record around the early 6th century BCE, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II conquered the Levantine coast and destroyed the cities they had occupied for 6 centuries. The deportations and destructions of that period ended Philistine political and cultural identity as a distinct entity. What happened to the population, where the people went, what communities they were absorbed into, whether their genetic legacy persists in any identifiable form in modern populations, is a question a study from 2019 did not fully resolve. A separate study established that the modern Lebanese population carries substantial Canaanite ancestry. The Philistines, who interbred extensively with Canaanite populations over 6 centuries of cohabitation, almost certainly contributed to the gene pool that study was measuring. Their DNA is likely present in living people across the Levant, not as a distinct signal, because the assimilation was too complete and too long ago for that, but folded into the broader ancestry of populations whose own histories stretch back through every subsequent conquest and migration the region has experienced. The people the Bible described as Israel's greatest enemy were, within a few generations of arriving, genetically indistinguishable from the population they had settled among. The enmity was real. The separation it implied was not.